Welcome to the Wedco podcast, where wedding wisdom meets street smarts.
We're dishing out all the tips, tricks, and wedding goss to take your wedding to the next level.
Time to ditch the formalities and get this party started.
This episode is brought to you by Studio Ninja.
When we are so busy with all of our work and we just need that extra helping hand to keep on top of all of our weddings.
With their automatic emails, scheduling, questionnaires, and invoicing.
It's a perfect tool to take your business to the next level. Studio Ninja. Hello and welcome to the Wedco podcast. I'm Togger.
And I'm Joel, and we're here at the incredible Redleaf Wollombi.
And today we got Joe from Pepis on the podcast with us. Thank you so much for coming on.
Buongiorno, guys. How are you?
Buongiorno. Better now you're here.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you so much for making the drive up. Really appreciate it, mate.
Pleasure.
It's I've seen all the photos of your food coming out of Redleaf, and I'm like, we need to have him on here.
Yeah. Like, safe to say, food is our game.
Yep.
So we love to put on a show when it comes to weddings and food, and that's just sort of how it is. It's all I know, really.
Yep.
Food as a focus. Growing up, obviously, as a second generation Italian, food was very much the focus at all the weddings I used to go to as a young child.
Yep.
Yeah. So
maybe we can go a little bit into your backstory
Sure.
for people. Yeah, do you want to have like a little bit of your backstory and how Pepis came to be?
yeah, so it's I guess it's a bit of a full circle story. My first job was working in wedding event centres in Sydney.
Yep.
They were the more traditional sort of big sort of function centres that you would have around Sydney and go to with sort of like the 300-400 person weddings.
Yep.
So I was brought into that because of my father, and that's a job that he sort of had as a weekend job before he was even married to my mum.
Okay.
So since 1986, actually, I was born in 88. So so growing up, it was watching him go to do these sort of shifts on the weekend, and then we'd wake up early on Sunday morning, and he'd bring us home. We see some goodies, some really nice treats.
Yep.
Usually in the form of like cannoli.
Yes.
So I grew up. Funny story. I actually grew up eating soggy cannoli on a Sunday morning, but I actually thought that was the way that you were actually meant to eat cannoli.
Yeah.
So I actually don't mind a soggy cannoli.
That sounds so weird.
You had a non-soggy one like years later. You're like, what is this?
Yeah,
This
then
sounds like shit.
I had a freshly piped cannoli, and obviously we pipe all our cannoli fresh at Pepis because that is the way you need to do it, and then sort of have it fresh. I'm like, oh, this is nice. This is different.
This is good.
Yeah, this is crunchy. Croccante, as we say in Italian. So. So it was. I've always been pretty nostalgic about weddings. I don't know what it is, but even watching my dad go to work on the weekends, I was always really envious, and actually used to play around on a Saturday night at home. I used to stay home with my mum and my brother, and then we, later had a sister as well, like a younger sister. But I actually remember some nights on a Saturday night, I was so envious of my dad that I used to pretend that I was waitering tables in the lounge room.
Yeah.
And then when the opportunity came to actually work, I was, just at that legal age in high school, 14 and 9 months and whatever it is. And as soon as, I think my dad was sort of yearning to get us in there as well, to sort of take us along.
Yeah.
And so we went along, and I was forever infatuated. And I was so small at the time that the boss of where I was working, they gave me a jacket that night, like a black suit jacket to wear. And it was like I was swimming in it. And he told my dad not to bring him back next week. He needs to get a little bit bigger.
To fit the jacket.
Yeah, but my dad's a bit, what's the word? He's a bit intolerant, I guess is the right word. He's like, no, he's fine. Don't worry. Because he was just like, he was persistent. He's like, he's out of the house now. He's earning money. Let's get him back again.
Yep.
So I was back the next week, and the boss was fine. It was more or less, he was sort of coming from the point of view, is he ready or not? But I loved it. I was totally invested, and the work was really fun. So for me, it was always that social aspect that I absolutely loved, because I like school mainly because I hung out with my mates, not for not to not to study or anything like that. So
Didn't enjoy calculus.
no, I suck at maths. I'm good with money, not with maths. And so it was so from that point on, like I would work every weekend and go to school tired on Mondays. But it was fine. Like, and but it was sort of like the full circle part of it was more or less, I got to the sort of that age of 18, 19, you finish up high school and all you want to do, all your mates are going out and we're going out to the cross and things like that. And I just wanted to party, so that became more prevalent in my life and I wanted to do that because I missed out quite a bit of it during high school. I would go to work instead of go to parties. So I sort of wanted to do that. I went to uni. I did some other things. Like I did like creative design. So I was a designer. So I thought that was the path and I left sort of hospitality behind. And it's funny because then, I got to the sort of the end of my 20s and I got back into hospitality. In fact, to actually pay for my wedding, I was pretty passionate about like sort of making pizzas at the time. So I had this idea of how I could make some good side money on the weekends by going out and making pizzas and doing a couple other little things. And that's actually how Pepis first started.
Yeah, right.
It was, it was 2 Gosney ovens or 1 Gosney oven at the time. It was a big Grana Padano cheese wheel that I thought I would never be able to use, but I thought I'm going to get one and make some pasta in it. Yeah. And it was lemon granita. And they were the 3 sort of core offerings that we had. And it just brought this really interactive food experience into people's backyards that sort of, I'll be honest, like, it was quite, like it wasn't really a thing at all at the time. And so be it, COVID came around at the exact same time. So I was saving for a wedding, going through wedding postponements, and then I had this little side hustle that was sort of taking off every time we'd come out of like a lockdown period. And it actually made me think on my feet a little bit. Like COVID sort of helped me in a sense of because of the home restrictions, I had to find new ways to cater to like, groups of 8 to 10 people at a dinner table. So then that's when I started incorporating some Italian antipasti, and I started to fill in the courses a bit. But then I still had the cheese wheel as a pasta course, and then the pizza as a main course, and throw in a couple of salads and some cannoli and some granita. And you've got yourself a really fun, casual Italian style lunch. So or dinner.
I'm so flipping hungry right now.
You'll get like that. So every time we come out of a lockdown period, it would sort of get me back on my toes, and it was good because the business was still young. As I said, it was still very much a side hustle, so I kept everything quite contained until the bubble really popped after COVID, and then that's when I started taking some leaps and bounds. And I'm generally a bit of a yes man. I'm very opportunistic. So in the sense of I'll say yes and then work it out later. But I'm also very methodical about how I do things. So as long as I feel like I'm not overcommitting, I will run with it. So taking I did hundreds of weddings when I was younger. So there was no stress or anxiety to do with that. So when someone then approached me the first time, the second time, can you cater my wedding? I didn't feel like I was overcommitting by saying yes. Even though I didn't maybe have the resources or I'll work it out. I've got enough know-how to make it happen. And then that's sort of how we found ourselves in the wedding sort of market. And as soon as I started doing our first weddings, I was just like, this is the way that Pepis needs to go. This is the part that's missing in sort of the kind of the weddings that I had and these estate style weddings, and this is the opportunity to bring something new and fresh and very Italian inspired to the market. And I saw no one else doing it, so it was just like perfect.
A no-brainer.
It was a no-brainer, and it was the people making it a no-brainer because we would just get inspired by their feedback all the time. So it was like, we're doing something right, so let's just it's one of those things, just keep rolling with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
So that was like 5 odd years ago ish.
Yeah. Yeah. We're approaching 5 years.
Yeah. And so then was it 5 years ago that you started going more into weddings? Or,
No, so
it was
5 years was
ago.
like literally the
Starting.
first
Yeah.
pizza we made,
Yeah.
you know?
So what was the timeline that you started getting more into weddings?
So it would have been, I always get my years confused now with
Yeah.
COVID and whatnot, but it was, I think COVID finished in 2022,
No, I don't know,
the start of 20.
No idea.
I remember there was, because I remember I had this deadline, and the deadline was I need to find a commercial kitchen space by March of this month.
Yep.
Because I've got my first weddings,
Yep.
and COVID's well and truly what it seemed out of the way.
Yep.
So then that's when I signed a lease for a commercial kitchen, which I think was in the start of 2022.
Yeah.
And then we just started going into the wedding sort of seasonal cycle from there.
That's awesome.
But also maintaining a very high private sort of booking game as well. Like, you know, we haven't stopped doing private events at home.
awesome.
Yeah.
Like we still do a whole bag of things.
Yeah.
Corporate, PR, private, home stuff, and then weddings.
Yeah.
But the things with weddings is that it's the focus in the sense of it allows us to plan because you can really forecast that stuff. So we sort of I've grown the business on my wedding forecasting.
Yep, definitely.
You know, so so fast forward now, so if that was the start of 2022, so let's say we've had a few good cycles now,
Yeah.
like a few good seasonal cycles.
Yep.
A lot has happened. We've done a lot. So, you know, we've done backyard marquee weddings up to 300 people. We've done, you know, 3 weddings in a week. We've done, and we did our first wedding in Portsea in
awesome.
Victoria.
Very nice.
Only 2 months ago.
Pepi should fit in very nice down there.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic down there.
Yep.
Kind of reminds me like Barrel.
Yeah, for sure.
Barrel, but on the coast.
Yep. We own a private property there?
Yeah,
or-
beautiful
Oh,
private
beautiful.
property. It looked amazing for an amazing couple.
Yeah.
That sort of, you know, took us on. You know, we'd never done it before. We worked really closely with them and the planner, and I was, you know, fully invested. I said, you know, we want to make this happen. If you take the step with us, I'll make sure we deliver. So so we went down there and we put on a real good signature Pepi show.
Yes.
You know, it was awesome. You know, it was like, I think they had 200 guests. It was this beautiful house, and it was a different style of service that we would usually do. It was cocktail style the whole way.
Yep.
But the planner we worked with, White Top, Sophie, she's amazing. She had this because the house was so beautiful, they turned it into like sort of like a bistro restaurant inside.
Oh, yeah.
So it was kind of like you could enjoy your food, grab a table and pretend you're at a restaurant. You could be outside by the pool.
Yep.
Or, you know, you could be by the bar, and it was just like this very beautiful fluid cocktail style event. And we started off with a nice muscaleria station and canapes and oysters and things like that, and slicing fresh prosciutto, and then we just kept segueing into more food stations. So then we had pasta. We had our two signature pasta stations, the cheese wheel and the big pasta pentolo pan. And then roaming on top of that, some nice, more elegant, substantial canapes, warm canapes. Mm-hmm. All the way into like late night bites. So, you know, we were there till like 1 a.m.
So good.
You know, flipping arrosticini skewers. Making pizza fritta is the best.
And do you get to use the houses down that way are massive. Do you get to use the kitchen there, or do you still need to hire a different space to be?
Yeah, look,
this?
we're very cautious of that. And for the most part, we need quite a decent space. So we usually set up like a satellite kitchen.
Yep.
Either sort of just tapped onto the house or tapped onto the marquee. So in that instance, we wanted to keep the house quite pristine because that's where this restaurant bistro was. Mm-hmm. And we know that our chefs are going to be out there performing.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's enough. And then sort of the more back of house stuff, you know, at the back that requires the big bulky ovens that no one really wants to see. They're sort of tucked away in a satellite kitchen.
Yeah.
Usually.
Okay.
Well, in that instance, they were as well.
Yeah.
But like for the most part, if we go do a lunch for 10 people, we'll most likely use their home kitchen.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Far out.
and take ultra care.
Yeah.
We see marble, we cover it up straight away.
Are you bringing your own specialty like pots and pans and everything?
Yeah. It's one of those. Yeah, it's tricky. It's not tricky. It's sort of like part of our questionnaire. There's a whole amount of planning and organization you need, even just to go, do a beautiful dinner at someone's house. They're using induction stovetop.
Yeah.
They're using gas stovetop. Then we've got to bring, what size is your oven?
Yeah.
Because then we've got boring stuff that you guys don't want to hear about. But there's a whole bunch of logistics is such a huge thing.
Yeah, definitely.
In catering.
Yep. And your
It's half the work.
commercial kitchen, is it in Sydney or Newcastle?
Yes.
It's in Sydney?
Yeah, so no, we're actually based in Sydney. So we're based, we've got a commercial kitchen in Marrickville in Sydney, which is quite a little hub, and it's really conveniently located to a lot of really good suppliers. We've got an office upstairs, and we use that as a tasting room as well.
Beautiful.
And that's where we invite our clients in to do their wedding tastings and whatnot.
Sick.
So it's quite homely and nicely fit out upstairs. It sort of looks like a little intimate restaurant, and then downstairs it's more the, the big commercial kitchen that we sort of
awesome.
have all that stuff. Yeah.
We've got some questions from like our followers, like our Instagram and whatever. And it was
People
funny.
ask questions?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And that was the first question that was on here was, do you offer menu tastings for couples?
Yeah, most certainly. Probably could probably count on one hand how many clients wouldn't do menu tasting before their wedding.
Yeah.
I don't know how it works with anyone else, but for me, hospitality is a face-to-face business.
Yeah.
And yes, I make a huge effort to be sort of quite front-facing. I want to talk to my clients first, usually, particularly if they're a wedding client. So they'll get to know me, but if it's on the phone, I want to then have the opportunity to meet them face-to-face.
Yeah.
So we get them in for tastings. It's usually sort of like that 6 to 8 weeks out before their wedding date. Because I'm also of the essence of I want to put my best foot forward to my clients in the sense of give them the most up-to-date seasonal menu to choose from. And then try that menu, take them through the sequence. If there's things they're tossing up, we can show them options. And it's really fun. And most of the time, like we keep it very homely and sort of family oriented. So, we get them to come, but they can bring up to 4 guests. And oftentimes it might be, most of the time it's parents, which I think is really nice. And, it could be bridal party or friends that they might want to bring along. I've had people that for whatever reason, they might have a close friend that might actually not be able to make the wedding and they might bring them along for the tasting. So, and for me, I do all the tastings myself for the most part, obviously with the support of my team, but I make sure to make an effort to be there, guide them through all the menu and whatnot. It's just nice to then, on the day of the wedding, I can just walk straight up to the mum and dad's hands and shake their hands, know exactly who they are, congratulate them. And the best feeling for me is getting to a wedding and the bride and groom, they're in a different element that day. They're on such a high. And, they just, to see someone that they know and they're familiar with and it's just good for them. I love when they come up to me like, hey, Joe, how are you? And good to see you. And it's a nice feeling.
And might be their tasting might even be more special to them than that actual dinner at the wedding. I remember
for sure.
I had a trip to France one time. We got to Avignon and super late at night and we couldn't get any food anywhere. And so the chef invited us down to his kitchen and he just made us soup and bread. But even that and having the chef there preparing something for you in his kitchen, it's something I remember forever. But these guys coming for their tasting with you there in that space, it's something they're going to remember forever as well.
For sure.
And then of course they're going to tell everyone who will listen about this experience.
Oh yeah, you just brought up some a recent tasting. I kid you not, they were beautiful couple. We're doing their wedding next year here at Redleaf, and they brought a film camera along, and they were taking snaps of all the dishes. And, they're making some of their family jealous and calling them up during the dinner and saying, wish you were here. I can't wait for you to try this pasta on the wedding. That's really nice, to sort of experience, even for me.
Yeah, definitely.
And again, it's just because I think what we've done with Pepis is sort of brought food back into focus and, something along the way sort of, I think maybe went a little bit astray and, and I'm just talking only from a personal experience.
Yeah.
I'm not saying
Yeah.
I'm not critiquing. I'm just saying like I grew up with, the food being really focused in at weddings. And then like I think sort of going through my 20s and having close friends getting married and whatnot, often food wasn't like,
It's just like,
like their
When's
priorities,
dinner?
priorities change. I guess the best way what I'm trying to say is we've prioritized food again.
Yep.
And it's now become like an important thing as part of the overall budget of a wedding.
100%. Steve said it a bunch of times on this podcast of like how important food is at weddings. Because you said yours wasn't that great.
Mine was rubbish, and it's like,
Let's not name drop then.
no, like it was in
Italy.
Italy. Like it just wasn't. We didn't plan well
in
for
Italy?
it. We had the
It was
best.
rubbish.
It
Wow.
was the worst
Okay.
food I had of the. We were there for 7 weeks. It
Yep.
was the worst food I had the whole time.
You're kidding.
And it should have been awesome. And I think we kind of just thought like, we're in Italy. It's going to be
Naturally,
amazing.
yeah.
And I mean, it was just a type of food we weren't used to, but people remember the food. And people are going to remember if it's bad or if it's good. And they're going to be like, oh, I remember that wedding,
Yep.
that food.
Yep.
Like, they remember. And
Totally.
So, yeah.
And like, I've come out of some pretty serious budget weddings with a lot of investment in food on our part, a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And then to get the phone call on the Monday, from someone that knew someone at that wedding or from the parents themselves saying, you guys did an amazing job.
Yep.
It means a lot, and it's significant.
Yep.
Definitely.
Because what I also like think now is particularly with Europeans like myself, I got married at Redleaf, and that was quite a different style of wedding for most of my family who were guests, obviously, at my wedding. We were used to sort of like the one-day events based around Sydney, conveniently located, walk into sort of an event centre.
Yep.
So, I had to get all my guests up here, and they had to get hotels and all this stuff. So there's sort of like this, you feel, don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but this, you want to make sure that they're well looked after because they're really going somewhat out of their way to be here.
Yeah.
And you sort of acknowledge that, and you've got to be, so we're really honest with ourselves, and we said, well, we're not going to, we're not going to shortcut the food at our wedding because we don't want people to come up here and spend 3 days and then go home really disheartened.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the shift as well. And I got married a couple of years ago now, and since I got married, I've noticed a lot more people in my community, immediate community of where I grew up and things like that, doing this more style of wedding.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where I'm seeing a bit of the change and a bit of the shift.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it is. It's a huge shift where people are focusing on canapé hour and dinner way more than what they were.
Yes.
Like it used to be like the photos were kind of the pinnacle and everything else was like whatever.
Yep.
Whereas it's 100% like we're putting on an event, we are getting married, but we're focusing on the event of it.
Yeah.
And we're going to have the best food and the best drinks and we're going to really enjoy this time with our family and friends.
Totally.
And I feel like that's the last year has been a massive shift in that direction.
And sequencing is such an important word for me, like the way you sequence food.
Yep.
Sort of something I think that I'm really good at understanding and judging. And you want to sequence the food experience as part of the event experience really well.
Yep.
Because you've got to acknowledge that for the most part, most guests are rushing to get ready in the morning, or they're coming up from Sydney, say they got to travel a bit. Then, they're rushing to the ceremony, and that ceremony time is usually around that 2-3 o'clock time. So they've either had a light lunch or skipped lunch or just had an early breakfast. They're hungry.
Yep.
So come end of ceremony time, if you don't have a really well thought out canapé hour or cocktail hour, you're in trouble. And you see that I actually see the wave of how people eat, and I can actually describe it now because they're actually so hungry at the very start. So you got to really go in, guns loaded.
Yep.
They might dip a bit, sort of coming into reception because they've had, particularly if you've had a Pepis experience and you got really good canapes, but also you've thrown in a food station or a pasta station or something like that, or a really nice seafood bar, they're pretty content.
Yep.
So you then dip into reception hour, but then that helps you understand how to sequence the rest of the event. So from a run sheet point of view, that's where you can slide in your formalities and things like that and get those special things sort of done at that time.
Yep.
rather than
While
just kind
people
of
are-
coming into the reception and being like, cool, we're going to get into main straight away.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Because again, they're actually not that hungry sometimes, and we see it because maybe sometimes the food might not get consumed as much at that period. But if you sort of then dip back up, and main course is very much, that's when they start getting a little bit hungry again, and they really lap it up. All the formalities are done, so everyone's sort of got their ties a little bit looser.
Yeah.
And then after that, everyone's very much into drinking and dancing and whatnot. And that's where you then, that late night bite or something really just seals the deal.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Because I feel like no matter how much you eat, if you drink a lot, you're going to get hungry
Yeah,
again.
exactly.
And
No one's going to be mad to have like something to eat on the dance floor or whatever.
Yeah.
Like no one's going to be mad.
no one's mad. And it can be sweet or savory. We've done some unreal things that just really get everyone excited. If you're sort of making late night crepes with the chefs, it's amazing. Or if you're roving around, some truffle fries, or pizza.
Yeah.
Never complain
you
about
can't say
pizza at sort of 11 p.m. at night, 11:30 p.m. at night. So that stuff wasn't around before. So it's cool. It's like sort of the clients are somewhat dictating what they want and what they I think, with the sort of social media and us having sort of everything at our fingertips and seeing what, everyone else is doing around the world, they bring you these ideas and you run with them, and I can safely say that, like, because I try and do quite innovative things with Pepis in terms of like from a food point of view.
Yeah.
A lot of them have come from client ideas, and that's why you've got to be opportunistic and you've got to be a bit of a yes man.
Yeah.
It may not make sense to you at the time when you say yes, or you might have to work out how to actually do it.
Yep.
I had a client very recently. I made a fleeting comment at her tasting, and I said it would be cool to do a Bomba Alaska cake at your wedding, not really knowing too much about what that is. And if you don't know what it is, it's basically a meringue encrusted sort of cake that's got gelato layering inside with sponge. So again,
Dude, this
Right,
podcast episode's not good for me.
it's good that we didn't. It's not good we did it at lunchtime, right? And I'm like, all right, I'll take the challenge. And I'm like, okay, cool. So catering is always logistics involved. Freezers are never readily available.
Yeah.
I've got to, I'm dealing with gelato here. But we made it happen, and where then these things become some of our signature offerings. It's the same with like the big live Italian millefiole cake, which is the layered pastry cake that we make from scratch.
Yep.
With the Italian pastry and the vanilla custard. Again, that was a client 2 years ago saying, "Can you make one?" And I just said yes, and then we worked it out later. And
Google.
yeah, that's it. Well, Google, and I've always invested in. I've always believed to invest in. If you're in catering, you've got to invest in the right people. In the kitchen, I've always invested in very good chefs.
Yeah.
And I have never come into this thing with just me naturally. I'm not egotistical in the sense of it's my way or the highway. I feel like I'm second generation Italian. So the way I grew up is quite different to a native Italian. Even culturally, we are quite different.
Okay.
And, I've always invested in good Italian chefs or chefs with good Italian, food knowledge.
Yep.
And you can learn so much from them. And they're the ones that then, like I took the whole Bomba Alaska story. Like I took that brief to my head chef and he worked it out for me. Let's do it like this. Like this is where we could sort of mess up a bit. Make sure you've got this on site. We're going to take it out at this time just before in case it melts and blah, blah, blah. And you just go, that's, we're very methodical.
Yeah. It's cool
We're
when
very process driven.
Yeah, it's cool when you got like a team like that behind you that are like kind of all in as well as you. Because it's one thing you having like that passion, that drive, that motivation, which we can clearly see with you, like chatting to you. But then if you don't have the team behind you to back that, they almost like tell you all the negatives. It's not going to, dude, it's not going to go. It's not going to work. Like we don't have freezers. And it's like, so I'll get a freezer.
I'm that guy. I'm like, we'll get a freezer. No worries, it's fine.
It's easy.
But you want, so you need them to be on your side. You need them to be fully invested.
Yeah.
You need them to understand the work at hand. Catering as a chef is different to restauranting, like, you know, being a chef in a restaurant. So, you know, I always say Rome wasn't built in a day, and I just chip away at things, you know, and I've got people working for me now that are pretty core to the team that had no prior hospitality experience and are running weddings for me like Pepis runs weddings.
Amazing.
You know, and I've got to be patient, and they've got to be patient with me, and you know, like patience is a virtue in that sense, because yes, I'm quite integral to the process of it all, but I can't serve 300 people at a wedding by myself. So if I don't have my chefs and then their assistants and then their kitchen hands and then my event supervisor and catering supervisor, and then, you know, for, you know, the 20 or 30 wait staff that'll be working that night, if we don't have them on the same page and, you know, understanding who we are and what we do and how we do it, then it, you know, becomes very difficult and very challenging. So I sort of see my role now as someone that needs to impart my knowledge and impart my sort of experience into them, and sort of, you know, allow them to, I always say that I try to enable my team. That's the most important thing, is enable them to do the best job that they can do.
You were saying you're just chipping away at it, but I think like, okay, First Pizza 5 years ago, and then I looked on your website last week and the amount of like places you're partnering with, I think you're chipping away pretty quickly.
Yeah. And it's funny, like I'll be totally honest. It's not my first rodeo in the sense of, it's not the first business I've had. It's not, you know, it's you know, you could sort of see this as a tribulation, but I've had a lot of trials and tribulations in my time. I don't know if tribulations is actually the right word. We'll check that later. Like what I'm saying is that the reason why this business has sort of grown to the success it has to, and in such a short period of time, is because of my, you know, my experience in the field, but also I just think just my general love and passion for it that was always there as a kid. And it's funny because like, another saying I like to say is that, you know, I've flogged a few dead horses in my time, but this hasn't felt like that because it's felt very natural. The things I've had to learn for the most part with Pepis is more just, you know, like the business side and all those things, and numbers and all those things that you have to really start thinking about to have a successful business. But on the ground, you know, it's just,
you've done that.
It's just it was just so natural. So, you know.
So, like you're obviously a massive foodie and love your food. Are you getting out much and like experiencing like dope restaurants or having chefs come to you or? Good
question. Maybe I don't put myself enough out there to sort of have chefs coming to me as such. I might seem like an extrovert. I'm a bit of an introvert. I keep sort of things a bit private in the sense, but I also keep things pretty local. Like it's nice to go to the odd city restaurant. You know, there's a lot of things happening in Sydney these days. If you go to a new city, you want to explore it. But for the most part, I eat local. I try and find those places that are a little bit off the beaten track. You know, it might be that guy that's come from Italy that's opened up a little neighborhood restaurant that's just, you know, got his things together, and he's in the kitchen sometimes cooking, or he's out on the floor, or he's doing both on the same night, and he's, you know, he's giving you, you know, something you've never tried before, or just something just really classic and simple. But I do yearn for that. I think this business has made me yearn for that authenticity in Italian cooking. It's such a Bible. I had someone really ignorant the other week say to me, an Italian person, they said to me, why would I need to go to an Italian restaurant when I can have Italian food at home? And I found that the most ignorant thing as well, right? Because I'm Southern Italian, and the food we've grown up on, very traditional to an extent. You know, it's I grew up for the most part on village food that my grandmother taught my mum to cook. And then my mum, you know, sort of put her
spin on it.
Australian spin on it, and who knows what we're eating now, right? Italian cooking is a Bible. There's, you talk to an Italian person and they're so ignorant among themselves, like from region to region, top to bottom. You could eat your way through Italy 1,000 times. You could go every year and you would still be trying and discovering new foods, cheeses, wines, everything. And that's what excites me now. So I actually I guess I've got the best job for it, but going to Italy is a really good sort of research case for me. And it's probably the best excuse, having an Italian catering company.
It's a tax write-off.
And I feel like
That's what my accountant tells me.
it is so regional over there. Like it is Italian cuisine, but like between each region, it is so different, the cuisine between both. Like I remember we learned to make arancini balls. Where were we? Trapani in Sicily, but they were making them there, and then they're saying like over by Palermo they make them more pointed because of the volcano over there.
Correct.
And, like, how different it is.
Arancini.
Yeah, and like within, like in Australia that doesn't happen, but like within 30 kilometers from here to here, it's a completely different thing. And like, no, we don't make it this way. Like, what are they doing over there?
100%.
And it's like how different it is within the regions.
Yep.
Pepi is like, do you take more from southern Italy being from there, or are you kind of taking from all of Italy?
I'm taking from all of Italy. You know, like some of the best food experiences, I went to Italy last year, and some of the best food experiences, they were great everywhere, but like, you know, I love food from Milan.
Yep.
You know, as much as I love food from Sicily, but we try and get inspired from everywhere. Another, like, you know, again, back to my chefs, you know, I let them feed in on the creativity.
Yep.
And they bring me new ideas, and they, you know, they might be from a certain region and they do things that way.
Yeah.
So I bring that in, but then you got to think like, yeah, we might be being authentic in terms of our technique and recipe, but then we for the most part, using local produce. So it's this, you know, it's this kind of this evolving kind of story of, you know, where does food really come from? Are we actually producing Italian food, or is it Australian food?
Yep.
It's a difficult question to answer because, you know, case in point, you have some chefs that'll be like, the buffalo mozzarella from this region in Italy is the best. And you know, so then I'll challenge that and I'll go, well, then either find the best buffalo mozzarella you can here and do something, but it's going to be different to that because it's not going to be the same cows eating that grass. So you're instantly already localized. You've already localized that dish. Or, okay, well then if you can't find anything here, then go create me something new. Something different altogether. So it's this interesting thing where, like, you know, we try and be authentic in one way, but sort of new and different in another way. And particularly for weddings, like, you know, we're dealing with an audience that, you know, like I'm second generation Australian. So I understand we have a different way of eating, and the things we like are very maybe, I don't know what the word is, but like, you know, we have particular tastes here. The way we look at sort of like prawns and oysters is different to how an Italian person will look at prawns and oysters in the sense of, like, you know, we have to include things sometimes. But just do them in a different way. So, like, for instance, like we've got like a live Italian seafood bar. And yes, we've introduced things that are a little bit off the beaten track, like, you know, lobster carpaccio and things like that. But we've still got to have the staples in there. We've still got to do, you know, the prawns. We've still got to do the oysters, but we just put a little twist on it. And then it's what you get out of that moment is the wow, I've never had that before, but out of something that they have eaten, you know, before. So, you know, think about oysters typically with lemon or mignonette, but have you tried it with lemon granita? So it's sort of like, you know, it's surprising them with something that they think they're already familiar with.
Coming back to produce, like, have you found amazing suppliers close to here that you guys love? Like, I feel like produce is everything.
Yeah, there's some amazing, you know, we're yet to fully sink our teeth into Wollombi, but our partnership at Redleaf is going to really sort of bring that along.
Beautiful.
But I can speak mainly for being sort of based in Sydney. You know, all our fish, you know, all our fresh produce mainly comes from you know, around, you know, all our, you know, regions here, or
for sure.
You know, we do import some quality Italian ingredients. But our supplier list is a good mix of sort of like 50-50. You can get really good, you know, olive oils these days that are produced here, you know, cold extracted and what have you. So yeah, like, but I think it's a case of sometimes, fortunately, unfortunately, the dish demands 24-month prosciutto.
Yep.
Or Parmigiano Reggiano. Okay. And you've got to also appreciate what's done there and the history steeped in that and the control that's been around those products and how prestige they actually are.
Yeah.
But then, you balance that with finding, like one supplier comes to mind, vanilla cheese. Vito, who is the founder of that company, is originally from Puglia. They've been making, the first people here to start making like things like bocconcini and stuff like that 30, 40 years ago. And now they're like, their burrata is so like, widely consumed in all the popular restaurants around town. So I now don't use any other burrata except that burrata. Yeah. And for me, it actually tastes better than most of the Italian burratas I've ever tried. Yeah. So like, for me, that's a story in itself. And if I can support someone like that that's here locally doing it, and we all know how hard it is to function here in Australia from a business point of view and a living point of view. So, my money goes to them.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Yeah. And what are the restaurants in Italy, like everything is super local. Like I think I was in Ragusa and there was like a restaurant that I think everything was within maybe a kilometer or something like that. And I remember going there and like having a tomato and I was like, oh, this is a tomato. Like after having your tomatoes your whole life and you have something like that. Yes. Like I feel like, you're getting the best from wherever you can. It's just the whole experience is just lifted, having that best produce.
Yeah. And like, that restaurant, it's probably not even intentional that they're doing that.
No.
It's just what they know. Yeah, exactly. What they do. Yeah. They probably don't talk to the guys in the next town. Yeah. They're like, we're only using, but it's funny because I had a very good taste of that growing up here because I had my grandparents migrate here from Italy. Yep. And we're from a certain small town in southern Italy in Calabria. Mm-hmm. And, I had the granddads that would bring over this, like smuggle in the seeds from Italy and start growing the tomato.
I was going to ask you about that. Heirloom tomatoes, you bring them back.
Yeah, and all that stuff. So, we ate off my grandparents' veggie patch our whole lives. Mm-hmm. Like my nonno had a fig tree in his backyard that was there till the day he died. And every summer you just knew he would go in, pick the figs and start handing them out. You would just wait. So there was that seasonality as well. Like, I just knew that was fig season. I just knew at this time, this is when we start having pasta with, Bellotti beans. Or this spinach grew. So that was really special. And maybe the way we live these days and, we're sort of more, like I live in an apartment. I don't have a backyard. Like it's difficult to hold on to that stuff. Yeah. It's difficult to hold on to that stuff, but we still do. Like my parents still get together every year. We make the tomato sauce. We still have sauce day. We still don't skip, salami making, day. But I feel like my generation, a lot of them are trying to hold on to it. It's nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's very nice.
Yeah. I might go into a little bit of partnerships because obviously you've been very good in that direction. How is it, I'm assuming it's going to be very intentional building partnerships with different venues and everything like that. Do you have a process? Is that from previous businesses that you've learned the knowledge of how to do that?
Yes and no. Like I actually think sometimes I struggle to network. Yep. I think it's one of the things that I'm actually trying to get better at. Yep. But I think I'm very good at how I deal and communicate with people when they are in front of me. Yeah. And all you need to really do, or how we've established most of these partnerships has really been by doing a wedding at one of these venues, by way of a client. Yeah. And then, obviously, you'd meet the owner and you'd have a chat and then you'd sort of, they'd see what you'd produce and they're really happy with that and they can see how happy the client is. Yeah. And then that's how you sort of start forming a bit of a relationship. Yeah. And what I am pretty bad at doing, maybe to my benefit, is like, I'll always always go that extra mile and always make sure that things are done in a certain way. Or if I use someone's kitchen, I'll try and leave it in the way I found it. And it's the same principle for venues and anyone's home that we go into. And people notice that. And, again, like I don't want to get that call on a Monday, that's sort of how it operates. So in terms of building partnerships, it's been very much like that, very natural. And then what we found is because, our offering is quite of a good quality, and the service we provide is good, and the things they're seeing us do are very different and unusual.
Yeah.
We then, started finding ourselves on, their preferred vendor lists. And then that's how we would then get referred on from their clients, because clients would go do a site visit and see, is this the venue that we potentially want to get married at?
Yep.
And then if the answer is yes, then it's like, okay, who are the caterers you deal with?
Yep.
And then we would get those kind of inbound inquiries.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it's sort of how we've run up until this point. And then along came the sort of the Redleaf partnership.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk on that a little bit at all? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So like, so that was something we didn't get handed or gifted. We had to work and sort of pitch for that amongst a whole range of, other, caterers submitting for this contract, which is a 5-year exclusive contract at Redleaf.
Oh, amazing.
Unreal.
So you're doing the catering for 5 years at Redleaf.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Oh, sweet.
Oh, that's huge.
It's huge.
Wow.
So it's so it's pretty big deal, and I sort of took it very seriously at the time in the terms of how we put ourselves across.
Yep.
Across, obviously to the guys at Redleaf.
Yeah.
So we did a really beautiful submission.
Yeah.
But then I think, obviously what did seal the deal was then again, like I was saying earlier, when they came in and were in the top three, sort of top three finalists, and they came in and I welcomed them into our Marrickville tasting room like it was, like my home, and we did such a really nice, beautiful dinner for them, and had an accordion player in the corner.
Yeah.
We built them a big wedding cake
Yeah.
for no reason. It was only 6 people. Big Millefiore cake, but we wrapped it up in boxes and took it home. They took it home. So I it was cool. Like but even in saying all that and having gone through the whole process, and you budget all this money towards these things and what have you, you still don't know and you still don't expect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, nothing's ever guaranteed. So it was funny. I finally had the opportunity to go overseas last year. Just after we submitted, I flew out a couple of days later, and I had a belated honeymoon because I got married during COVID, like I mentioned earlier. We finally got around to having sort of a honeymoon. So we went to Italy and a couple other places in Europe. And the first, I'm like, finally, I'm like, just going to clock off in 3 weeks. Like, just don't have to worry about nothing. And then I get the call, you got the contract. I'm like, all right, looks like I'm going to be pretty busy on this holiday, but it was fun. It was like, I had the adrenaline pumping but also like, it wasn't just me for that dinner. And to then be able to, pass that news on to the team, it was very nice. And it was, everyone was very excited. And even now, because it's, fast forward almost a year now, we've got a whole lot of runs on the board with bookings for 2025, which is when our contract starts, and a lot of clients that we've spoken to and we are working with. It's just everyone's so excited and energetic about the whole, the whole operation that we're going to be doing up here. And it's just like, I just can't wait to see what even more new and cool and interesting things we bring up here.
Yeah. Well, as soon as I contacted Matt, and like I wouldn't usually say this because we don't want to play favorites with vendors. When I was chatting to him, we always asked like, okay, are there any vendors that you would love to have on? Like while we're at your beautiful venue, is anyone? And straight away, he said you straight away. He's like, if you're coming down here, you have to interview him. And it's like, then I like looked into the food and everything like that. I'm like, well, it looks amazing, of course. But just for like Redleaf, straight away to be like, no, we need to have Pepis on board for an interview as well.
Yeah.
That says pretty high standards about you.
Well, that's the thing, I think it's, we're very mutually aligned.
Yep.
I think the partnership makes sense.
Yep.
Matthew and his team are great. We get along really well with them.
Yep.
We work really well. Matt and I have a great relationship. We know what we both want out of this situation and what we're trying to bring as an overall experience to our mutual clients.
Yep.
And we're going to achieve that because that's just how I run. I don't rest on my laurels. This is only the beginning in terms of Redleaf. So that's why I was saying, so I'm excited to see what's going to happen in 6 months, 12 months. We're doing so many cool and interesting things because of this contract. We've got a commercial kitchen that's just starting to get built, which we will use as the permanent kitchen here for all our events, whether it's 100 people or what have you. But then either side of that, we're going to use it as like a little Italian ristorante on the Friday night. If the bride and groom want to have their pre-wedding dinner, we can do things like that, or we could set up a beautiful Italian breakfast buffet on the big travertine bench that we're going to be have in there, and have that set up on the Sunday morning for Italian breakfast.
Getting married a second time.
It kind of makes me want to as well.
Honestly.
We're in this beautiful estate. We're in the Redleaf residence at the moment. And even offering, we just want to, because we're going to be here and we can sort of really dig our fingers into this whole operation, because it's different to how we would usually run as a fly-in, fly-out caterer. You're a little bit limited in that sense.
Definitely.
But because we can actually really sink our teeth into here, the sky's the limit. Concierge services, in-room dining, all those things. They're all the things we're talking about.
Heirloom tomato gardens in the backyard.
So someone because we'll have chefs up here all the time. So managing that garden is great. There's so many so many supply contacts we're making, and making some olive oil. That's our own olive oil down the road. Speaking to this cattle farmer and bringing in some of that produce. So many good cheesemakers up here.
It's
amazing.
It's really refreshing to hear your passion, love from, I feel like that's very seen in restaurants. I feel like that would be very expected. You go to if you went to a really high end restaurant, you'd be like, oh, this is Matt Moran's restaurant, whoever, and you'd be like, this is I'm expecting good food, but I don't feel like I've witnessed that within the wedding. There's a handful of good venues where you're like, delicious food, delicious food, delicious food. And then the rest is just like, okay, we're eating tonight. I'm probably going to get a sore stomach later on.
Yeah.
So it's refreshing to see such passion and such love from a catering, from a food point of view for weddings.
Yeah. Well, look, my I've always got very high standards. I think it's got to do with sort of, I don't, like I said earlier, I don't rest on my laurels as such, and I have very high standards. And when I do something, I do it very well and very quality driven.
Yeah.
I sort of grew up that way, appreciating the somewhat the finer things in life, or understanding quality.
Yeah, for sure.
For instance, having a granddad that used to dress to the nines and be a shoesmith and would understand if your shoes were like faux leather or real leather, and then tell you off for buying faux leather. They're not good shoes, they're not going to last you a while. That sort of started. That gets embedded in you, and but in terms of the catering side of things, yes, I won't lie, we are trying to produce restaurant quality food at your wedding. I'm not going to stand, I'm going to stand behind that. That's what we're trying to do, and hopefully we are doing that. Yeah. But also that's, hopefully it is something fresh, and I don't see many other caterers on podcasts.
Yeah, exactly.
Wedding caterers as such, because it just doesn't, I don't know, for me, the word catering, growing up, it was an ugly word. Yeah. And I'm not saying, again, I'm not criticizing, and I'm not saying there aren't good caterers out there, because actually there are really good caterers out there. And if you spend your money, you'll get a good caterer, if you invest. But that's the thing. You've the way I grew up with catering, particularly because of my background and my experience, is pre-cooked food delivered and warmed up.
Yeah. Bain-Marie, something like that.
Yeah. So that's why that's where I say Bain-Marie's, we've never really used one, although I think there is an opportunity to do something very cool with Bain-Marines, and I'll really hope to explore that one day. But we've yet to use one. That's why I say it's an ugly word. I haven't found another suitable word to use instead of catering. Yep. And we do use the word catering, but as long as people see it as, well, these guys are serious, and these guys, we will bring in serious restaurant cooking equipment on site.
Yeah.
You know, we've cooked on the back of tents on farms with combi ovens and things like that, because we don't rest on producing poor quality food.
Yeah.
If the food needs to be eaten and cooked in a certain way to then be consumed like that at that time, that's how we produce it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, then we question whether that should be on our menu or not, if that makes sense, because then it's probably not a good engineered menu if you can't produce that fresh. In Italian, we call it al minuto.
Yeah.
So, but at the minute.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you often hear me say to my chefs, we're going to do this al minuto.
Yeah.
And if they say no, then I'll say why. And if they give me a whole, well, might get soggy, or we have to test it first, let's make sure.
Yeah.
You know, like I've never fried an arancini back at my kitchen and then brought it somewhere.
Yeah.
Trust me, I hate taking around deep fryers. The oil is a pain in the ass, but we do that because we want you to have the best arancini possible, it just came out of a restaurant.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So that's the whole philosophy around our food.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I love it.
Yeah.
Hey, we've been an hour.
Unreal.
So quick.
Oh, we went over time. Sorry.
This is awesome.
Mate, it's
No. This is perfect.
Go on a bit.
But
been fantastic.
man, this has been amazing.
Yeah, you guys are awesome. Thank you for having us.
Like the passion behind it is insane.
Yeah.
Where can people find you? If
Yeah.
someone jump online and everything like that.
Sure. Look, most of our social media stuff happens on Instagram.
Yep.
So ciao, as in hello in Italian, CIAO, _ Pepis, PEPIS, is where you'll find us on Instagram, and we're pretty good on direct message as well. So we'd love to, and that's where we post a lot of content in terms of the events we've done, so you can really get a good feel of what we do.
Yep, love it.
Otherwise, we've got a website with some menus that are generally pretty updated and what have you. But and that's where you can find our email address as well if you want to get in touch about an event or get a quote or have an inquiry.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Thank you so much for coming on, mate.
Pleasure, guys.
Amazing.
It's
Legend.
good to be here, and thank you so much.
Easy.
man.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Wedco podcast. We're dropping a fresh episode every week featuring industry professionals dishing out the wedding wisdom you need to turn those dreams into reality. Make sure you are following us on social media, you have those notifications turned on so we can help plan your wedding day. Your dream wedding day just got a whole lot easier. Thanks for listening.